Thank you so much. Thank you for the greeting. We're delighted to be here, Nina and I, from the Global Women's Strike. And I have to say something on the independence struggle that you all are engaged in. It's obviously not over yet. I don't know the ins and outs of it. I really am deeply ignorant for a lot of good reasons. But I know that your going for independence was an enormous power for us, because you told Whitehall and all of them to go to hell, and we loved it. We really loved it. We really felt that what we wanted said, some of what we wanted said, you were saying. Now, I'm here to speak on women, race, and class. And in fact, for me, it's very hard to speak about women without speaking about race and class. So I'll give a very potted history and then go on to say where I think the women's movement has gone or not gone, and some of what we should be doing right now. First of all, we wanted to say what was women's relation to capital. That's the first question you have to ask. If you're a serious political person, you want to know not how you feel about things, or indeed how people feel about you, but what is it, how do you relate to this power structure? What is it you are doing for them that they want you to continue to do? And what is it you don't want to do anymore and you want to do instead? But that is your basis. That is the way you organize a movement rather than a career, which is what a lot of the women in the women's movement work to organize, I'm afraid. We'll get to that. But once we had said that women reproduce the whole working class, and in fact, we've gone a bit further into the obvious that women reproduce the whole human race, which is not on anybody's political agenda, not unimportant, the reproduction of the human race. Can't say it's minor, marginal, something that we don't want to give thought to today, but maybe in the future we'll address this serious question. But once we had said that, and we said that the division fundamentally between women and men in general was the division of the wage, and the fact that women were expected to do not only to reproduce the human race, but not to get any kind of autonomy of money of our own by right for that crucial work. Once we had said that, we had broken a very crucial part of what had held the movement back, the movement in general back. Because we said there are power relations within the working class which do not deny class, but re-explain it, reinterpret it, re-understand it from the point of view of the people who are living it. And once you have done that, then race is not a political problem. It's a big problem. But in terms of how you comprehend, how you understand, how you organize, and what is standing in the way of your organizing is the power relation within the working class. You see, that's where we got to from women. Now, it wasn't difficult for me. I was up to my eyes in the black movement, and I had to explain to myself, first of all, why I was doing this and why I was doing that and why they weren't together. Okay? And that was a problem that people more generally were having. You know, women who were women of color had a lot of problem with men, just like other women, but they had other problems as well. And then you would talk about double exploitation and triple exploitation. You had so many multiplications of exploitation, but you never understood, you never grasped that we are each individuals fitting into many sectors, and that our struggle had to be to build a movement where we can concentrate on one thing, but all our sectors must be represented. And that was something that black women, first of all, found and clarified to some degree. They were the first. They said, no way you're going to make me forget I'm black, because every morning of my life I face racism, not only what I face as an individual, but I am the one who protects my whole damn family against what is happening against us. And that work that I am doing is the work of being a woman, a black woman. Okay, so what you are doing is you're saying we concentrate on the specificity, on what is specific, not only to sectors but to each of us. But then at the same time, we discuss it and see it and work against it and organize by seeing what is general to us, which gives power to against our specific exploitation, but does not scab on other sectors. Now that's really, to be able to say that took a few decades. To be very clear on what it was we were doing and saying. And I have to say that the reason it became clear at all was because we were not having a conversation. I don't know what this conversation is. You know, you can have a dangling conversation. You just converse and nothing changes. And we didn't even have a discussion. We had a struggle. We were engaged in particular cases of particular people who had particular struggles, and we mobilized to make clear that this particular struggle, the woman who was beaten by her neighbor, her white neighbor, the immigrant woman who was beaten by her white neighbor, and then the police came to arrest her husband for domestic violence, which they never would have come to if she'd called them for domestic violence, mind you, etc. You know, you clarify, you find out who the police are. I knew that since I was 5 years old, well, 4. But what you do when the police behave in this way, and whom do you call on, and how do you deal with the sectors, and how do you get the media, and how do you get this woman's words to be public, what she experienced and how she viewed it. Those were lessons that they teach you what with all due respect, you cannot learn in a university, because that's life and life only. And the more that the university understands that, the more likely that you will understand more in the university and help us to understand outside as well. So that, to give you some idea of the women, race, and class, this was the basis. You see, when we said wages for housework, everybody said, oh, what that means is that housewives should get paid. Well, it did mean that. It meant that women who do unwaged work get paid for it, or at least, of course, we're Marxists, we don't assume that we get paid for our work, but we get paid something that enables us to have some independent social power, so a woman cannot say the only money I have to call my own is the child benefit, which the government is now taking. You know, so it's true that wages for housework was a demand. But it was also a political perspective beginning with that demand. And it was the perspective against capitalism and against the power divisions among those of us who are the enemies of capitalism, so that we can actually do something about capitalism, which is not to scab on each other. And that is not an easy thing to organize, but it's the only thing worth doing, because capital, it's not stratified. Here's capitalism and here's the working class and blah, blah. Precisely because there were power relations within the working class, capital is in charge to the degree that they keep us divided. Now, in a way, we always knew that, and we always said that, but we didn't know, and we didn't home in on the fact that the power relations of the sectors was precisely the power of capital. And those who are acting for capital against women are men, and they are not capitalists. They are working class people whom we have to win over. And sometimes we have to win over by leaving them or by other instructions that we might be able to give. The point is, it's not an easy thing for the sectors that are more powerful to learn the lessons of not scabbing. But what convinces them always is the power of the sectors they presumed could not give them power. That is, men always assumed that they were the powerful ones. They had the money, not much, but more than we. They had better wages and we had none or little. But what they had to learn was that there were no struggles of men that were not dependent in many ways on what women did or didn't do. And when we were describing the work that women did, the caring work that women did in this reproduction of the human race, one of the things that immediately crossed our minds, because it was so obvious, was the justice work. So we saw the men in prison. Who was running their campaigns? The women, the mothers. A man in Jamaica who's a lawyer, an old friend of mine, civil rights, he says, the police shoot some people in Jamaica, and the next day, who comes to my office? The mother, the auntie, the sister, and says, what can you do for my boy? He says, every single time. Now that's a political fact. You see, that's when they said the personal is political, they didn't include that this individual act is a social and political act of class struggle. Because the women had not been to university or had not expressed it in the language that politicos assumed was the only way that politics could be articulated. Well, they just said, what are you going to do for my boy? And that was enough to be going on with. So this was the unrolling of the political perspective of wages for housework as it related to various sectors. Now, it goes without saying, I probably should not, it cannot go without saying, in fact, that the whole of the Wages for Housework campaign was international from the very moment it began, and could not be otherwise, because you're not anti-racist unless you're international. You can't be. First of all, you are the object of all kinds. Come here. You are the object of all kinds of pressure, which tell you to assume that you are better than anybody else in the world. Or if you're in London, you get it so hard, But secondly, you have to give expression to the different sectors and make sure that the case of the different sectors is made by that sector. And the only way they can do that is with autonomy. So you have an autonomous black movement. You have an autonomous women's movement. You have an autonomous gay movement, lesbian movement, black women, disabilities, single mothers, sex workers, and other criminals. Terribly important. I put criminals in quotes, you know. The criminals are all outside. They're in charge. So, but you know what I mean by people, and you know, they make the distinction between the political prisoners and the others. And you know, that's really not good enough. That's not my subject tonight, but it's something that Nina and I have really to face a lot, you know. We are all political prisoners, those of us who are put inside, you know, because what they have done to us, you know, we haven't done half enough back. So anyway, that's another subject for another occasion. But, you know, each sector must make its own autonomous power felt, and we knew that quite early. So that the Wages for Housework campaign was international and based on autonomy. And when you're based on autonomy, you really are fighting the racism that is constantly imposed upon you, and the sexism, obviously, and all of the other discriminations. And we found a formulation finally, I can't remember when, late 70s, early 80s. We said, nobody, you cannot say about any individual or any group of individuals that they want less, need less, or deserve less than anybody else. And that sums it up. You know, you can just go around testing and find out, are they racist or not, if they agree or don't agree with that. But the women's movement did not take the wages for housework perspective. On the whole, feminism went in an entirely different direction. Now again, I'm going to give you a very potted history. I don't know about the struggle for the vote in Scotland. I hardly know about the struggle for the vote in England, but I know a couple of things. And one of them was that when the vote was won, the movement split on class. I know that because Eleanor Rathbone, who fought all her life, a Liverpool woman who was the daughter, who was in a family of ship owners who never carried slaves. That's a good training, you know, that's a good beginning. She said that when the vote was won, the women who were promised help, I'll show you the quote later, you know, the sweated worker, the persecuted housewife that was going to get some help, these women forgot her entirely, forgot the working class entirely, and went for careers. She said they did it then. Now, if they did it in 1919, what do you think is going to happen in 1969 or 79? They did it only more so. They went for careers, and a book was published recently which gave us some figures, and I don't want to persecute you with figures, but I'll just give you just some idea about the class division among women, which is a direct result of feminism. 87% of women are, no, I have to start here. 13% of women are professionals, managers, employers. 87% of women are not. They're real. They're grassroots. By the way, the word grassroots is very useful because it gets you away as, is she working class or isn't she? Well, I know a housewife who is the wife of an oil executive, and she's grassroots, she's not working class. You can't say she's the same as a miner, but you can say she's grassroots and her responses to the establishment are more or less the same as mine. It's a very important word in describing whether you are connected with the establishment, whether they have some purchase on you, some control of you, some attraction for you, really, whether you feel in some way beholden or obliged or loyal to them. That's what I consider grassroots to be. So 87 are grassroots, and 13, they're not the 1%, but they are getting up there. And they don't have the problems that we have. And I'll tell you how I know that, because this same woman, what's her name, Alison Wolfe, The XX Factor, it's not a very good book, but some of the information is dynamite. It's worth getting for that. She said, I still can't read it, but about 13%, of women make, over a lifetime, 88% of what their partners make. Almost 100%. I mean, some of them with it. Those are the ones with, yes, I know, I remember now. Those are the ones with professional qualifications. 88% of the 100%. Those with middle qualifications, they make 57% of what their partners make. And the ones without qualifications, they make 34% of what their partners make. In other words, their partners make 3 times what they do. Now, where do you see that reflected in any positive way in the women's movement? When Tony Blair came to power, God help us, the first thing he did was to tell Harriet Harman, and he must have told her, you do it or you're off the front bench, because she looked deeply embarrassed to say, we are cutting single mothers' benefit. That's how they introduced New Labour. They said what they were going to do. They told us, they read the rooms, is it? Yes. So now we are faced with a man who has a Kenyan name presiding over, what's the city? Ferguson. Presiding over a regime where white police shoot black young men, and in another case, a child, a 12-year-old child with a toy gun, whom they referred to as a young man, to get them off the hook that they were child killers. Anyway, so you have Obama presiding and Harriet Harman presiding. They're two very different, they're some years apart, but the principle is exactly the same, that feminism has come to persecute us, to keep us in our place, and to move ahead on the basis of our not moving ahead. Okay? Now, the women are not different from any other sector, because the same thing has happened in the black movement, the same thing has happened in the lesbian movement, the gay movement, the disability. In fact, every movement, the reorganization of capital against the great movements that we built are based on taking a few of us, elevating us, so they are plenty of integration. You want to know integration? Look at any government, or the most progressive and the most outstanding government. They can show you their black people. They can show you they can even show you their Muslims in the midst of Islamophobia. They're really good. They can show you their women. They can show you their wheelchair users. They're really in it. but we are out. That's the thing. That's what has happened to the movement. Now I want to go back to the question of caring. Just to say a few things. You know, it really took me a while as a housewife to acknowledge caring as something positive, but I just wanted out. I did not want to be home all day, locked at home with a child and no money. You know, I wanted to do things. I don't know what I wanted to do. Things. I wanted to have autonomy, but I loved my kid, and I was very protective of him, and when he hurt, I hurt more. Look, I didn't make that happen. That happened. And every mother will tell you the same. Even the ones who get drunk every Saturday night. If they hurt, you hurt more. And that is a human instinct on which you build a good world. And everything we have done to protect our children and ourselves and develop our caring has been stamped on. Now, the implications for this are very wide, aside from unhappiness and a lot of madness. There's the question of breastfeeding. Again, it is the first junk food, this bottle feeding, this formula, the first junk food that we give our little ones. Can you imagine? You know, you're feeding your child at worse than McDonald's, and you give him or her a bottle, when the natural process is to breastfeed, and what every single expert will tell you is the foundation of human health. You know, you're not going to give my dog from a bottle. You know, they know what they want, but we don't know what we want. And breastfeeding, for a while, it was political, because the Germans were saying, what's the name of the firm? Nestle baby killers. And people said, oh, you mustn't say that about Nestle. And they said, yes, we must. We must. Because that's who they are. They're baby killers. And it has not been on a political agenda, but it's crucial. And the reason that it's not on the political agenda is because those facets of human beings which are biological and which interfere with the market are denied an existence. Now that's really bad. You know, they have convinced us that we are no more than animals if we breastfeed, but we are animals. What's wrong with animals? I mean, they are torturing animals. Most animals are in concentration camps, like cows and the others. We don't want to discuss that. But the fact is, we are not reduced by our biological function. We should be praised. We should be given money for it. Okay, it should be acknowledged. And the thing closely related to that is food generally. Now, everybody has acknowledged that there's a problem with health that has to do with overweight. And the first overweight thing, by the way, is the formula. That babies get overweight from formula. But aside from that, women are not out cooking, are not home cooking. Men are not home cooking. So nobody's home cooking. So everybody's eating outside and getting fat. That is everybody who is not rich. The grassroots is eating out. Women wanted out of the kitchen, but they didn't want McDonald's. You know, that was not the alternative that we wanted. We wanted men to be part of what we were doing in the home. And we never got that. We got McDonald's instead. Literally. And the story is that, McDonald's offered, and they had what did that man say? They had they had an advertising campaign of McDonald's. Was it McDonald's or Kentucky Fried? Kentucky Fried, yes. Had an advertising campaign which said Kentucky Fried. They said women's liberation. That's right. Well, it liberated women a bit, but it killed a lot of people. And they didn't mind that because they didn't have to pay when the people died. And now it is beginning to be understood that one of the problems with the health of the industrial world is that nobody's cooking, because it's much more important to stack shelves at Sainsbury, or Tesco is better because it's Zionist, and then much more important than cooking for your children or yourself in a way where you are human and humane. You see, that the point is, Marx is really right, He is really right. He said, either you produce for the market or human beings decide what they produce and what they don't produce. Either it is for the human race that we produce, or the human race is for the market to produce. And we have got stuck so far with the market, but there are signs that this is cracking. I want to make one more point about the caring. When Women Against Rape began in 1976, one of the slogans they had, I helped them with this slogan, rape like charity begins at home. Because I said, and because I knew, that there's more rape in marriage than ever goes on in the street. And that's the truth. And if anybody wants to discuss it at a later point in privacy, whatever, I'm happy. I'd like to be able to defend my position. And now we can say that caring, like charity, begins at home. And when it doesn't go on at home, it doesn't go on anywhere. And we have seen the results of this. I don't have to tell you how many people have died in hospital because they weren't cared for, how many people with disabilities have been treated like objects and beaten and the object of sadism and sexual repression. We don't have to say what the police are not doing about protecting girls in Rotherham and in cities and towns all over the UK, probably all over the world, but we leave that aside because we haven't got the proof yet till tomorrow. And, this is enabled by the fact that the caring work that women have done and still try to do on weekends and early in the morning and late at night, driving themselves crazy and ill, that caring work sets the standards for the whole society. And we met, was it yesterday, with a woman called Chubb, Elaine Chubb, who's a whistleblower. There was an article about her and others in a newspaper a few days ago. And there are hundreds, and in fact thousands, of whistleblowers complaining about the lack of care at all kinds of institutions all over the UK. Now, I want to say something about those institutions, and what it means that you have whistleblowers. But I just have to say that one of the greatest disadvantages of women going out to work to do what? It's not that we're going out to do this career, is that the cutting of the state to the degree that we had won some things from the state has proceeded apace because women weren't there to defend their kids and their families and their mothers and all the rest. because I know my own mother, and I know myself, and I know many, many other women who are neighbors and friends and all the rest, and family, and they fight for their kids. They fight for their families. They say no, and they organize in the neighborhood for childcare and all kinds of other things. But the women are not doing that now because they have no time. Their time is completely taken up with waged work and with trying to fit the caring in, so that there has been another cost to this driving women out to work, which has been the policy of feminism. But I should have said, the kind of work that the feminists have organized for themselves is very different from the kind of work that has been organized for most of the rest of us. We are not lecturers at universities on the whole. We are not managers of large firms. I'm not saying we want to be. I'm just saying this is not how it is. We are doing the shit work of society at shit wages. Sorry for the French. So now the whistleblowers. A lot of these people said they couldn't stand it. They couldn't allow people to be treated in this way. They had respect for the human race. And there was no organization in the society to which they could go. Now, please take this very seriously. When you have to have, I can understand when Snowden couldn't go anywhere. Well, he found something. He found The Guardian, at least for a while. He found somebody to help him. But these whistleblowers who said about the hospitals, who said about the institutions, who said about the rape, who said about the racism, all kind, the doctors who said about the patients, all of them, hundreds and now thousands. The reason they exist is because there was no place they could go. There were no NGOs. The NGOs are there for themselves. We know that, at least we should. There were no real serious political parties. There were often no trade unions. Very rare you find a trade union is going to go up against it and take on the whole establishment. There was nobody to go to. Okay. And that tells you where we have reached and what we need to do. Because it's perfectly clear the whistleblowers are doing great work, are opening up possibilities, but we have to do the campaigning that based on the possibilities that they are opening up for us. And I want to end by talking about, very briefly, what it is we are doing. Okay. First of all, we have a petition. Now, I remember there were some left-wing men in the United States, really big, strong, macho left-wingers. And when I spoke and I mentioned a petition, they looked like, oh, you see, no guns, no Molotov cocktails. What kind of struggle is this, they said to me. They didn't say it, but they looked it. And I complained about it later. But a petition is a useful organizing tool, so long as you know that you're not going to make the revolution with petitions alone. I'm not suggesting that. They never waited for me to say that. In any case, it didn't matter. We have a petition called A Living Wage for Mothers and Other Carers. There are all kinds of reasons why we give about why that's a good idea. But our idea is, first of all, that carers, in quotes, those defined as carers, and mothers, those defined as the biological and the emotional, etc., that they're one. We have to break the barrier between those of us who get paid for our work get paid anything for our work, and those of us who don't. That's a crucial part of what we need to do as a movement. Let us begin with the mothers and the carers. And that means that so many people can see themselves, including lecturers at universities. You know, there's a lot of caring that goes on if you're a teacher. And a whole set of professions have caring as part of them. And the profession, because of the way they're organizing the universities at this time, we have one of our people in Ireland is an academic, so we hear about what they do. About how squeezed you are in time, you know, that they're not able to do the caring part of the job that they were hired to do. And this is part, you know, you open up the question. You're caring, but are you doing the caring you want to do? What do the people need from you? What do the animals need? What does anybody need from you that you would like to give, but you don't have the time, or they don't let you? Or you're so exhausted yourself that you can't be bothered and you'd rather just finish with this and go home and do the other job when you get there. You know, these are the questions of our lives. This is how we are spending our time. These are the relationships that we are working with and on, and I hope for. So that the petition is really opening up the subject of caring, opening up the subject of motherhood, and making it possible for us to connect. But there's something else about the petition. We really, when we sat down to do it as an international network, we said, look, we are really tired of demanding money in an industrial country and what is for the women in our network, in India, Peru, etc. So we decided that we were going to have an international petition, which was hell on wheels to write, very difficult. But we had a strategy, which was we were going to demand that the money that comes in aid or loans goes first of all to carers. Now, I don't know if it'll ever happen. We might overthrow them before it happens. But we want a perspective. We want a framework. We want guidelines. We want a political perspective, yes. And we feel that the petition will do that, will translate in a number of languages and move around. And finally, we have a women's center. I'll pull the picture out. I have it in that bag when this is over. We have a women's center with a number, how many? 15 autonomous organizations, including an organization of men, Payday, who have been building an international network of refuseniks, and their slogan is "Refusing to kill is not a crime." And they're doing good work, including, by the way, in Greece. The Greek people are very good, very strong. Each of them does work, and we have to meet every so often because some people don't know what the other people are doing, and there's not enough cross-pollination. But fundamentally, we are all working with the same general political perspective, which is the recognition of the carer, the payment for the carer, and the society based on the needs of the carer, first of all, because that means that the human race is the center rather than the periphery of the political perspective of the state. And the way that we do that is, first of all, just as I said at the beginning, what is the specific and what is the general? I'll give you one example. This brother will know something about it because his mom is part of our center, and he is. People came to us, women came to us who were asylum seekers, And they said they had a right to stay, and we absolutely agreed with that and fought their case by case, and began to understand what was happening and how almost all of them were rape victims who have a priority to stay, but nobody told them. Nobody even found out that they were rape victims. And when they did find out, the government refused, tribunals or judges would refuse to acknowledge that they were rape victims because, well, you know, they didn't know a lot about it. And why should they take the word of a woman who's come from a war zone in the Congo? You know. Anyway, we fought. We got some women the right to stay, but we did it on a self-help basis. And we said this is part of our anti-imperialist work. And who worked on it was Black Women's Rape Action Project, a very good and strong organization. Legal Action for Women and Women Against Rape. Those were the three organizations that worked together on this from the center. And so we're fighting individual cases, but always on the basis of self-help. They meet every other week. There are 30, 40, 50 women come together at the center. We have to raise money for the fairs because it would cost us maybe £300-400 for them to meet. You know, the fairs, and nobody will give us, you know, the London transport will not help us. They won't reduce anything. So we did get a little UN grant. I think it was the UN that gave us something, and then we got some other grant to pay for the fair so they can meet. And then they work out how to deal with individual women's cases. And they learn a lot, and we learn a lot. And we feel that we are part of the anti-imperialist, anti-racist, anti-capitalist, and pro-women struggle. So, you know, that's part of how we do things. There's a great deal more, and I'm always ready for a meeting, and there are a number of women who can come as well as me to discuss how to campaign, and we have no problem with burnout. We just don't. We have never had it. We had some traitors, not many. Few, very few. They got tired and angry and they weren't making progress. The struggle was making progress, but they weren't. Well, they left, but we went on and we're doing pretty all right. Okay, I have to end by referring you to Julius Kambarage Nyerere. Dr. Julius Nyerere was the first prime minister and then president of the state of Tanzania. And many of you will not know. How many people here know the Arusha Declaration? There's more than 2. That is a lot. People don't know that the Arusha Declaration was one of the great documents of the 20th century, where Julius Nyerere put down a lot of stuff, including what were the responsibilities of the government to the people and how they were not to own more than one house and not own more than one car and not own more than one this. And he said for the purposes of the Arusha Declaration, one means husband and wife. So they weren't able to steal that way either. They were furious. They were furious. They had come into the government to make money. They hadn't come to make revolution. This is something else. Who else goes in? You know, they were the same as everybody else. They were just like the Labour Party. You know, get as much as you can as soon as you can. But Julius Nyerere was different. And he was different from everybody, except Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah was indeed a great man. But Nyerere was more far-seeing, less left, although I think he was just the most wonderful Marxist. He didn't think he was. And he says something in the Arusha Declaration, which when I read it, blew my mind, and blows my mind regularly when I read it again. He said this. He said, we don't have enough money to build hospitals and schools, etc., in the villages. 96% of the people were in villages when he said this. He said, we don't. He says, we're going to build them in the cities. They're going to have universities, schools, etc. He said it better than me. Don't, I'm just summing up. He said, now where is this money going to come from? He said, well, from the villages. He said, the villages are going to pay for it because they're going to grow crops, they're going to sell them, and then they're going to pay their taxes. So the city is going to get the benefit, but the villages are going to pay the bill. And then he said, not in sequence, it's all in the Arusha Declaration, but he carefully put it separately. He said, now, what goes on in the villages? He said, the women do all the work. He said, the men are on leave half their life. You ever heard a head of state say that? There was one who did. The men are on leave for half their life. He says, the women work harder than anybody else in Tanzania. They work Saturdays and Sundays and holidays, they work. And he said, if the men worked harder, we might not need any loans from abroad. You ever heard that? Yes, from Nyerere. In the most famous, one of the most famous documents of the 20th century, and nobody ever told us that that was there. Even people I know very well who are very big scholars in Africa did not report to me that we women were in the Arusha Declaration and in plenty, in big. And so he said, look, he said we have a wonderful tradition in Africa that everybody works and everybody benefits. We don't want capitalism where everybody works, most people work and some people benefit. We don't want that. We don't want anything to do with that. We want this other thing. He said, I was raised in tribal socialism. He never left his village till he was 12 years old to go to school. And he said, we can build and develop this country if the villagers work hard and decide how to do it themselves, to be in charge of their own production, you know. And I call it Ujamaa. And some people went and they did it, and it worked out very well. And we found a man in Scotland, not a Scottish man, but a man in Scotland who lived through that and was their English advisor, and who wrote this whole story down in 1970. And a lot of academics read his book and quoted him, but nobody helped him to publish it. But you know, we women are different. And so, this is the book that we will be publishing on the 9th of December. And it tells you about sex, race, and class because he is an anti-racist, unbelievable, clearly anti-sexist. And anti-racism for him meant that he was against Africanization for reasons that he gives. He didn't want that. And this book tells you what he said and how he said it. And he was one of the greatest men of the 20th century, and we want him to be acknowledged. Because you see, if you're a woman and a man says the truth about you, it has even more power than you can get any other way. And so we want President Nyerere to speak for us. Thank you.
questions and thoughts?
I'm so sorry I arrived late. I came from Edinburgh.
Now, I have a problem with hearing, so you have to speak loud, and then she'll tell me if I've missed it.
Oh, I said I'm really sorry that I arrived late, but I was in Edinburgh for a conference, so I apologise for that. But you mentioned about paid work.
About?
About paid work and the difference that is between women who don't get paid and women who do get paid. And I just did a piece of research for my master's, and I found that. But I found that within the women, they really do believe that if they're not being paid for their work, and these are women that were providing really complex needs for children and families, but if they weren't getting paid, they didn't value it either. So I just found that
They didn't what?
they didn't value that. They didn't
Absolutely.
value, and I find that really that's a real challenge for women. I think.
That is very classical. Do you think every worker in the world can say, I am exploited, I make £350 a week, but I'm really worth £700? They don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the quality, you know, we slaves always imbibe the views of the master. And the only way we get rid of it and clean ourselves out is in the course of organizing against him or her.
Mm-hmm.
There's no other way. You know, the leap in consciousness from one day to the next when people organize together is something like miraculous. And the thing about sociology that I find most troublesome is that they take what is as what's showing. And in fact, what is a moment of the process. You know, I'll show you a quote from Marx. I don't want to bother everybody about, you know, how you have to be involved in a practical movement to get rid of the muck of ages. That's his phrase. I think other people, I hear people know that phrase, know that passage, such a wonderful passage. There's no other way. The practical movement of working with other people against your exploiter is an absolute, it's a revolution. It may not be the revolution, but it is a revolution. And it is every day that you conquer something. And what you conquer may be small. You know, what you conquer may be the police did take it seriously, or the judge did hear what I said, or I got the teacher on my side, or, you know, a friend of ours who's a lorry driver, they had to give him a £5 rise every day because they had to, because nobody would take the job. They were all doing contract work, what do you call it? Agency work. And so he got you know, it made such a difference, you know, this £25 a week more. You know, and he was, yes, and he wasn't like, I've got it. You know, he was like, well, it's about time. Some of it, before he was not even complaining that much about his wages. But after he got a £5 rise, soon after got another £5 rise, and now I think he's ready for a lot more. You know, it's like that.
The questions, comments? Yep.
Thank you for that. Was a really good talk. I really enjoyed it. The only thing I'd have to say that I take issue with
I can't hear her.
breast milk versus.
Can you speak up?
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Milk versus bottled milk. Bottled milk is junk food. Like bottled milk, it has to be a part of a woman's choice to have the autonomy when she has a child to choose how she raises it. And I don't think it's the job of feminists to stand and say one is better than the other. For a lot of women, it is like a way for them to regain body autonomy, to be able to return to a job that they actually want to go in. Not a lot of people have, like, not all women want to be so biologically involved in the responsibility of their child, and that's their choice. And I do think that breast milk, like saying that bottled milk is a child's first fast food, is wrong. Even from a sort of nutritional point of view, it's not true. Secondly, is that the idea that that we're all getting fatter, and that should be a issue that we take against. Like, again, it's about women having control of their bodies, and we have been told to look a certain way for so long, and we're just starting to embrace a movement that says that we can look how we want, that we can be fat, and that cannot be a negative word for us, that it can be that we can eat what we want and not have to be judged and deemed on what society's previous values were. And I think that's very important to a lot of people in the movement. That's all I can say.
Can I answer that? And I'm sure you'll have things to. First of all, you know, you're implying that there's such a thing as free choice. In fact, we are all conditioned in various ways, and there was a big movement. You know, when I was pregnant in 1982, 1981, and then my son was born in 1982, there was a whole movement, for example, to have natural childbirth, because the whole thing was cesareans and a whole set of things, because the hospitals were actually dictating the terms for how women gave birth.
That is true.
And no, hold on, let me just finish my point. Okay, and there's been a whole fight to be able to breastfeed. And in fact, they're telling us that it's the other way around. They're telling us that women are being guilt-tripped that they have to breastfeed, when in fact, it's the formula industry that has actually forced women, okay, between that and going out to work, that has actually forced women to abandon breastfeeding. Just like we're all giving our pets tin food. I mean, since when? You would think that for thousands of years, dogs were raised on dog food at the supermarket. And now, if you give your dog fresh meat, they say, oh my God, you mean you're giving him raw meat? And I mean, literally, people ask you that question, and you say, well, how do you think that dogs have survived, okay, and animals generally, for thousands of years? You know, it's like people are so conditioned by the industry. No, by the industry. Hold on. I know that you get to a point, okay, where obviously you don't want to be forced by somebody else to live your life this way and that way. I'm aware of that, and I think that the whole breastfeeding thing, you know, abandoning breastfeeding was, to some extent, was sold to us with the fact that then the men were also going to do it. So we didn't have to get up at night, because the guy was going to get up and he was going to give the baby the bottle. And that meant equality. First of all, it's bullshit, because the men, you know, these men have never actually done the amount of caring work that the mothers actually do. And what has happened is that as a result of it, we didn't get the men to do their share as was supposed to happen. But the work that we were doing as women got completely devalued and discredited and totally invisible. It's more invisible now than it's ever been. And now women are being attacked for breastfeeding on the street. Women are being thrown out of various places for breastfeeding on the street.
You should say that breastfeeding is best, though. It's about what is best.
Breastfeeding is best.
Yes, it's best.
Breastfeeding is best.
Well, I'm very sorry. I'm sorry.
The milk, I'm sorry.
It's best for a mother.
Excuse me.
This is just a shame.
You know, you're mixing things up. I'm sorry. Can I just finish my point? Because you're mixing things up, okay? One thing is to discriminate, you know, like you were talking about being fat and all that and being able to redefine yourself. One thing is being discriminated against for the way you look, and we're all against that, whether it's to do with being fat or with being too thin or with whatever. And another thing is the fact that some things are not healthy. It doesn't mean you have to be discriminated against. But having diabetes is not great. It's better not to have it. Now, you shouldn't be discriminated if you have diabetes, and you should get whatever you need for it. But that doesn't mean that in life you aim to have diabetes.
Yeah.
You know, it's just something that happens as a result of a whole chain of events that have to do, a lot of it, with the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry having the power that they have. So you can't just...
That it is best and that they are doing wrong by their child by having breasts, by not giving them breast milk. It's about a woman's right to choose. To have
Absolutely,
autonomy
it is
over
about
her
a
body.
woman's right to choose. But I have a right to choose breastfeeding
You don't have
as
a right to
best.
tell other
Now,
women
that's
to
not
say it's
a
better.
debatable subject. You see, the question of breastfeeding is whether you do it or not is your right to choose. But you have to make, first of all, an informed choice, which women are not allowed to do, because they go into the hospitals and they give everybody a sample of the crap, of the junk food. And they also encourage, as soon as a woman has any difficulty, they discourage her. But the most important thing is that she has to go back to work. That's the
That
thing.
is.
And she has to drop it and do the job.
And if she wants
And
to
if
do
she
that-
wants to breastfeed, that's irrelevant. She doesn't have that
So
choice.
if she wants to go back to work, that's not
What?
her choice. If she wants to go back to work and she wants that to be
That's
her
right.
choice,
If she wants to
then
go
she
back
should
to
have the
work,
choice.
yes. But what I'm saying, absolutely,
Lots of
that is
people
her
don't have
right.
a financial incentive to
Wait
stay
a
at
minute.
home.
You're mixing up what she wants to do with what her possibilities are. And you cannot do that. You cannot say, I told you, when I was a housewife, I wanted to get out. But I didn't want to get out to the factory that I had to go to. That was not my choice. That was my default position. I did not want to work on an assembly line. I remember the woman who said, I lived through my whole life this morning. What am I going to think about this afternoon? That every time I think of my experiences, my years in the factory on wiring and soldering and putting radios together, I think of that woman who said that. And you know, I wanted to get out. But tell me that where I got to was liberation.
I never said that. What I said
No,
is
I
that
know
it's
you
about
never said
body
that.
autonomy.
I'm not accusing you of saying that. But it was a rhetorical question. But what I'm saying is, before you say what she wants, you have to say what are her choices. That's all I'm saying. And I don't think you're saying that.
No, but the issue that I have is that you said that breast is best and that bottled formula is junk, and it's simply not true.
It is no.
It's
That
not true.
no.
It
But
has
that
some
we'll have to agree to
benefits in the
disagree, because
first
there's
week.
no. But
you're
if
telling
I
me
will,
that
I will
it's a
send
position
to
of like-
whoever you tell me the information that we have on breast. Is there somebody who will volunteer?
We have a whole book on it.
Yeah, we'll
Get it.
send you the book among others free. We won't ask you to pay. Send the book and send the information on breastfeeding. And then can you respond to that?
We can talk after, because I think what you
And
said
anybody
really
else who wants to. Because you know, you are forgetting the great struggle that took place. You know, Mel, maybe you're not forgetting it, where they went to Africa in particular, and they brought formula, and they gave the women the formula free until their milk dried up.
That's
I'm
And
not
then,
saying that.
hold on, excuse me. And then they said you have to pay. And babies died. And that's when they called Nestle baby killers, because they were responsible for the death of thousands of babies.
Yes, and that's not something that we should readily forget
What?
ever. That's not something we should readily forget ever, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't give women a body, like
I
body
can't hear
autonomy
what
and
you're
a
saying.
choice.
What did
So
she
it
say?
doesn't mean that women shouldn't have a choice. It's not something we should forget.
No,
It doesn't mean-
no, absolutely the choice, but absolutely an informed choice. You agree with that, don't you?
I don't think telling them that it's junk food is an informed choice.
You don't think what?
I don't think telling women that
Only in junk food is an informed choice.
I think we should move on.
No, we'll discuss that.
Yes.
No, that is to be discussed.
Yeah. Are there any more questions? Yeah, in the back. Two. I think I might take two at a time just to get. Yeah.
My question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we'll take you and then you. Yeah.
Okay. My question is just about being involved in a movement, and I think in Scotland after the referendum there was loads of women organising around independence, and that was obviously a really incredible thing to watch, if not a little bit uncomfortable, because it was ultimately like a reformist movement and a movement that involved working within this party political structure, which I just don't think is going to lead to my liberation or any women really. But one of the problems... Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm trying to speak loudly. But one of the problems now is that there are women who are continuing to be involved, operating on that same basis within this party political structure, and there's movements for like a 50-50 gender balance in the Scottish Parliament, and loads of women who I think previously wouldn't have been very inspired to be involved in a campaign that meant being involved in a sort of party political structure are really, really inspired by it, but they're not talking about race and they're not talking about class. And I went to a workshop about it a couple of weeks ago, and there's a feminist organisation in Scotland called Engender, and they're coordinating a lot of this. And I asked the head of this campaign, like, you know, if not now, then when are we going to start speaking about the absence of women of colour and the absence of working class women in this campaign? And I just don't feel like it's okay to support that movement, but so many women who previously weren't politically involved are now politically involved because they think it's, and it is talking about gender, but if the movement, like at this time, you know, if it's still not talking about race, still not talking about class, and they said, you know, I just feel like we're always being attacked for wanting achievements for women. Like, why are we always being told to think about people of colour or working class people or trans people? But I just, like, really, is it radical? Like, really, should we be supporting it? But it's what so many women are talking about right now, and I just feel really conflicted about when is the time going to come where we say, like, do you know what, like, this isn't radical and it's not progressive, and I am a feminist, but I'm not going to support your shitty reformist liberal movement.
Well, you know, I think that the movement for independence is such an enormous opportunity, precisely to make the points that you're making and to organize with other sectors besides white women, and also with asylum seekers and also with immigrants. And, you know, it's a moment of opportunity that is opening up, and I hope you will take full advantages of it and also tell us about it. We need to know what you're doing up here. You know, one of the best experiences that we as our centre have had has been the people in Glasgow, I mean on asylum, who organised as a housing, well, it was a cooperation within a housing unit where they would not allow the vans to come to get people to deport them.
The dawn raid.
The dawn raids, yes, and they stopped the dawn raids. And we said, yes, we went all about saying, you know, in Scotland they stopped the dawn raids. You know, they know what to do. Boy, how about you? You know, you were really a big power for us, as Scotland has always been a big power for the movement in England.
I'm going to stand up. Can you hear me? I'm going to bring up American history because it's the one that's most readily
Well, I know it best
in
because I went
mind,
to
yeah.
school there.
It seems to me that the American communist movement of the 30s, which, as you know, had included a lot of blacks, especially in Harlem and Chicago and Alabama, was a greater threat to capital than the American civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, because it threatened really to completely transform power relations in the country. Whereas in the 50s and 60s, what the ask was a few legal, political concessions it seems to me that if we really want something radical, whether we're talking about in the U.S. or in Britain or in Europe or wherever else, that we ought to be looking back to what was began in the 30s, not only in the States, but also here in Britain and in Germany and other places. We ought to be looking back at that tradition and carrying on with that work rather than the sort of, gradual reformists, as the woman here was talking about, politically correct, will just kind of, go along to get along stuff. And it seems that in order to do that, there has to be a revitalization of the trade union movement in the private sector. I don't know what your particular views on trade union is.
I think it's hard. I
suspect they're
think
very
you're
strong.
suggesting something big.
But it seems that labor has to be organized in order to be in order to really counter capital, which is always organized. And it seems to me that there is no way around organizing labor unless you have trade unions.
Now you get to the nub of a crucial question.
So
Yes.
I want to know your thoughts on
Yes. I think that's good. I appreciate that question. Before we take others, I really would like to address that, because that is, in quotes, our opposition. It's not really our opposition, but I say that, but that is certainly what we broke from. We broke from the inevitability of the revolution or the movement being led from the trade union, by the trade unions, from the, quote, point of production. That's what I broke from. Yes, I'm a point of production person, I came from that. But I also came from being a housewife. And I want to say something about the 30s and then about the 60s, because I think I was born in 1930. I know that's really a long time ago. But that gave me an opportunity which every day I am thankful for, which is I saw the movement of the 30s and grew up in it and was shaped by it. And nobody seems to know about it. They don't know that before the 60s there was the 30s, and there were the Scottsboro Boys. The Scottsboro Boys shall not die. That's what I chanted when I was 6 years old. They were the black fellas who were accused of rape, which they were nowhere near when it happened. And the Communist Party led that struggle. But they were racist as hell, the Communist Party. You have to know that. I'll tell you more about that another time, or maybe after this.
Yeah. And
but
one of the mothers, Ada Wright, from the Scottsboro Boys, came to Scotland as part of those transnational campaigns as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they were fantastic. I mean, the campaign was fantastic. It really, and it made a lot of anti-racist people, and the most anti-racist of them was Orson Welles, But we are going to have that discussion. There are two parts to my answer. The first part is we're going to have that discussion after Steve McQueen makes his film on Paul Robeson. That's his next thing,
Looking forward to that.
Really, so am I, because I want to know how he deals with the fact that the Communist Party persecuted him and all kinds of other things. That story, he's going to tell it, because the man, he's determined to tell the truth. I don't know what happened to him, but he is. And we're going to get that story. But the second thing is the point of production story. Now, you're much younger than I am, and so you will not know, because nobody ever writes about it. Tell Christian, he's the historian. Before the Second World War, the working class community was not focused solely on the point of production. It was focused, my mother was involved in people who were put on the street and breaking the lock and moving the furniture back in for the family who couldn't pay the rent. They were involved in a welfare movement. There was the anti-racist movement, the anti-lynching movement, the anti-Jim Crow movement. There was the unemployed movement of the unemployed, often decisive in strikes, supporting those who were out on strike because they were unemployed. They were there. They could go and stand, against the police who came to break it up because there were no unions at that time. The unions were just beginning to be built. My father was one of those who, I think he used to break heads, but he also landed in hospital a couple of times and in prison, that kind of thing. And that movement, what happened to that movement, I think, and I'm not a historian, was that by 1940, the CIO was built. United Auto Workers, Ford signed a contract, and everybody said, okay, now we have massive unions, let us concentrate there and make that the central point. And the left especially wanted to do that because, they all want power. They're all in competition with each other, in my experience. And so they wanted where the working class was organized already to take it over. And there were great fights. Everybody who knows it will tell you that. Great fights within the unions between the Trotskyists and the communists and the socialists and things like that. But it was all concentrated at the point of production. When we began with the Wages for Housework campaign, we said yes, and the point of reproduction as well. And we said both. We didn't say instead of. Please understand me. We didn't say instead of. We said as well as. And what we wanted to concentrate on is how much the women had contributed to the struggle of men who were waged, but the women were unwaged. And I have a poster of, I think it's a GM, the sit-ins, one of the sit-ins, and the National Guard is lined up. This is a photo. A National Guard is lined up, and the strikers are there, and in between is a line of women. Every single face is Irish, I have to say. It was clearly the Irish Revolution in Detroit. And that is what brought the union. But then, once they had the contract, the fact that women had done all the work was invisible. It vanished. It never took any part in who got the credit for that struggle. And that happens all the time. And what we were determined to do is to say this is the struggle that women are waging in the point of production and outside of the point of production with unwaged work. Okay? And that's what was made possible not by the 30s, but by the 60s. Because in the 60s, we had autonomous power as movements. And that opened all the possibilities. We were talking about that, sister, just a few minutes ago. As soon as the movement formed, we had a different idea. Like overnight, And that's what happened to us. And yes, the other thing you had in the 30s was the Garvey movement. Where, you had the anti-imperialist movement, you had the absolute revolution, or not revolution, but big upsets in the Caribbean, in the so-called West Indies. A lot of things. But what we were concerned about is to show that when all of the forces of subversion come together, that's when history is made, and that it's not going to be successful unless it comes together. That is the point of production and the point outside. And that means that women will have to do a lot more than we're doing right now. I don't mean more work. I mean more movement organizing. I think we've had.
Graham, did you?
Well, I thought
did you have a, with, you said there was a question. There was a, yeah.
It's a quick one, just to
Yeah,
say
yeah.
that, just for someone's benefit, last weekend there was a radical independence conference, and during the session on gender equality, there was about 150 women were there, and they, at the end of the discussion, it involved Women for Independence and other forces. They came for a call for a sort of women's strike on March the 8th here in Scotland.
Yes.
As an organising thing that they would like to do. I thought that you, as the founder of the Global Women's Strike, might have a few words to say about that. I've saved telling you until now.
I might well.
What do you think?
Well, I think a global women's strike for one day even would be a tremendous thing. And I think that everybody has a right to come out on strike for what they want. I don't think, but I do believe that we have to really take finances seriously, the economics of women's liberation. We have to take it much more seriously than the movement has taken up to now. And if I can just mention one way in which it's been neglected, pay equity has been terribly neglected. The money went into abortion. The money went into the pro-abortion movement. It went into organizing for women not to have children, but it did not support the women who wanted children and who wanted a right to pay equity, whether they had children or not. That's a crucial part of what has to happen now. And please, when you're discussing it in your groups, please raise the issue not only of payment for caring, but for pay equity. And that as long as women are not paid anything for caring work, for most of the caring work we do, pay equity is undermined. And we want that pay equity. We're entitled to it. All of it. We don't want 88%, what the top women want, what the top women get. We want 100.
I'll tell them.
Thank you.
Are there any final questions? Yeah.
The question I wanted to ask you, Selma, was this. Given the, I don't have any background in science, but given what the scientists are telling us, what the bulk of the scientific community is telling us about the approaching
Catastrophe.
ecological, environmental catastrophe,
Yes.
global catastrophe, what do you think feminism's response should be to this, almost defining challenge to what it means to be human? If we keep doing what we're doing, and we don't need to say that, but what do you think feminism's response should be to this? And I would think it would be this defining challenge about what it means to be human.
Well, I think, can I just say that the first thing it has to do, we have tried as best we can, is to say what kind of struggles third world women are involved in order to save the environment. I mean, the Indian women have been way ahead of everybody else, but who knows what other people are doing? And we have to stop war, because what is happening in Gaza is the destruction of the environment. I mean, war is the greatest polluter. And yet, people, they can say it's terrible that one man's head was cut off, which was terrible. I mean, I don't think it's a nice thing. It's just awful. But 5.5 or 6 million people in the Congo have been killed, and you don't hear about that on Radio 4. They don't mention that. They have other things to think about, more important things to think about. So I think that a lot of things have to happen to a lot of people, but I think the first thing is to organize internationally. 2 days ago, I heard something that was really important, and that is, what's the name of the journalist who was right, who you were reading something to me about it. What's her name?
Oh, Naomi Klein.
Yes, Naomi Klein, until recently, relatively recently, said in the paper that she had believed that you could convince capitalism to be more sane. Well, they're suicidally greedy. They are suicidally greedy. You heard it here first. And now she thinks they're suicidally greedy. I don't know if she uses those words, but she knows that they're not going to learn, they're not going to stop, they're going to do it until we're all dead, including them. Including them. They cannot restrain themselves. You know, you read Marx's Volume 1 of Capital and you understand that because he describes it. You know, he says they can't stop. You know, it's like Dr. Strangelove. And I mean, it is exactly Dr. Strangelove. And she says now that she knows that everything has to change, you know, and everything has to change, but can only change with a movement. That is, I mean, you know, you have to begin to say what the struggles are for the environment, not the environmental organizations. They are compromised beyond belief. They need whistleblowers. You know, they're no good. I don't mean they don't mean well. I'm not saying that. I don't think they're evil. I think they're trying to do it without doing it. They're trying to do it without throwing everything out, and you cannot. You cannot. It's none of it any good. You know, we are good, or at least if we get it together to make a struggle, we'll be great. You know, we have greatness, each of us in us, but it will only be in the course of overthrowing them and stopping their lunacy that we will really come into our own. So there is no shortcut to forming a movement. That's why we spend 24 hours a day doing it.
Can I come back? Yeah. I don't know anything about feminism, you know, but just a couple of ideas have sort of coalesced. And I actually think now that the only way that civilization is going to be changed is with feminism at the centre of things.
Well, I don't know about feminism, but certainly caring.
Can I explain what I'm thinking? I mean, I'm going to say something. I don't know. I'll just say what I think, yeah? The thing is that, see, for a man, right, you know, women are connected to nature in a way.
That's what that woman is absolutely horrified to hear you say. We are all connected with nature. You are going to run me into trouble, because I don't mean that. I mean we are all connected with nature.
Yes.
And the idea that women are connected with nature is what she's fighting against. She doesn't want to be the only one who's connected. And the way she does it is by saying, I'm not connected. I don't agree with her strategy, but it is a piece of sexism to assume that we're the only ones who are connected.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not assuming. I'm not saying that it's that men aren't connected to nature.
Good. I'm glad you said that.
We're all part of nature. You know, we have all evolved through nature. But the difference between women and men is that women are connected to nature in a way that man can't be. Women can bring children into the world. No man
That's
can bring
true.
children into the world.
Not yet.
And I think, you know, or I imagine that, you know, the process of bringing life into the world, that it must, you know, over the thousands and thousands of years of evolution, it must give women a perspective on life and on nature, which no man can have.
That many women believe that to be true.
And what I'm saying is that the thing about the thing about climate change. Well, okay, sorry. The thing about climate change, right, is that to me the thing is that we seem to have lost so much contact with actual nature, right, and women are closer in some sort of depth psychology way to nature that men aren't, and that's why I'm saying feminism has to be at the centre of this ultimate defining challenge, climate change. Would you?
Well, this will be the last question because we have to get on, but I wouldn't put it that way.
No?
I would say that we definitely are different because we make babies,
Yes.
and that does give us a perspective, but it's not the making them that gives us that perspective. It's the caring for them. And I really feel strongly that men will be civilized if they don't have to work all the hours that God gave or the devil, and could get to know their children and could care for them with women rather than leaving it to women to do. I'm very worried about the way you say it because it's often an excuse to give us less pay. Let's face it. Yes, that's what the woman was, she knows what the story, it's to put us, I know you don't mean it, I'm not suggesting you do. It's not an accusation, but I'm saying that you have to be very careful because the maternal instinct has been a great exploiter. You know, I have it, but I don't want to have to pay my whole life for it. You know, so let's not discuss that right now. Let's discuss the work that I am doing that benefits the society. I bring human beings into the world and I care for them. And I don't want to do it only. I want to see that it's a priority for men's time. For men's time. The men in the UK work the longest hours in Europe. That's because you have a Labour Party as we know it. And trade unions who are not really interested in anything but getting on with somebody who's on top. There are not too many trade unionists that you can trust, like I can count it on the finger of one hand. What's his name? Sir Watka. The guy from the railway, he died. Suddenly, we went to the funeral, we felt terrible. He helped the cleaners, the African women who were cleaning. He helped them to organize. Bob Crow, yes. He helped them to organize and to get the rate for the job. Now, how many trade unionists are going to do that? You know, we know what I've been in unions. You know, they're there to enforce the contract and to make sure that you stay in line and that you're there at work every day. Look, I come from unions. I come from union building. But these organizations have turned against us, and we have to build from scratch. But it's not from scratch because we have all the generations of experience. And one thing I've learned in the anti-Zionist movement, and that is us golden oldies have a lot to say. You know, you go to a meeting and the people who speak out loudest and strongest are my age. You know, they have absolutely nothing to do with the myth of Israel being for Jews and against. They know the whole story from scratch. That's your experience. It's just amazing. I say, well, where the hell are the youngsters? Come on. Because they're 80, 85, 90, and they're cussing out. We had a letter in The Guardian 3 or 4 months ago from survivors of the Holocaust and the relatives of survivors and others who were killed in the Holocaust, you know, hundreds, and most of them were survivors. One of the people who was 90 died the day after the letter was published, in fact. Published in The Guardian or in the New York Times, I can't remember, but you know, we know about that, and we know that the men not only can do it, but they thrive when they do. And the younger men are much more interested in knowing their children. And that's a very hopeful sign. Now we have to get some strikes for men to take care of their children. There's a long history, a hidden history of how anti-racism in New Orleans was also anti-sexism, and they wanted to give women the right to vote on strikes because they were the ones who heard the children cry when they were hungry, so they had a right to decide on whether the men went on strike. You know, there are great incidents, moments when we you know, stormed the heavens, so to speak, and found ourselves bigger than what capital has made us into, and we have to hold on to that. I think women have a great role to play, and I think that women have been great strugglers for peace, but I think it's often been twisted into a glorification of our exploitation, and we're all very nervous about it for that reason. But I think we should end there. But we're not on nervousness, but on all of us becoming carers, that is the new society.